Welcome to the Grandpa Channel, where stories don't fade, they get recorded. I'm Steve Harris. My grandkids call me Ritters. This podcast is where grandpas and grandchildren pull up a chair, turn on a mic, and let her rip. Grandpa stories are chock full of wisdom, life lessons, and frankly funny as hell. Your stories are the magic elixir to help your grandkids navigate Mr. Toad's wild ride, aka life. Let's Grandpa. This episode of the Grandpa Channel is brought to you by Hires Big H, home of wonderful hamburgers, French fries, onion rings, the magical and medicinal, so I say, root beer freeze. Head to Hires and treat yourself like the legend that you are. Now back to the channel. Hello, my friends, and welcome to yet another episode of the Grandpa Channel. My guest today is a good friend of mine and somebody that I greatly admire, Dan Gibbons. Dan is a multi-talented, I believe the word is polyglot. That's how Dan would never describe himself that way, but I would easily describe him that way. He's a lawyer, trial lawyer, a judge, has been a judge. He's an author of 23 books. And then tell me the current string of your poetry, daily poetry.
Yeah, something like close to 3,000 days. I started in 2018, and I decided to write a poem every day, inspired by my dad. And in his older years, he started writing little poems, and I never stopped. And so I haven't missed a day since December of 2018.
That is amazing. Dan's just an amazing guy, and somebody who is full of warmth and wisdom, and I'm really looking forward to this.
Likewise.
I want to have you, let's start by give us a little bit of thumbnail sketches of your grandfathers.
Yeah, my grandfather Gibbons and my grandfather Bay are from different planets. Grandpa Bay was a carpenter, a sort of a jack of all trades, struggled from the Depression on through the rest of his life financially, succeeded magnificently as a father and grandfather. Mm-hmm. He taught me how to work. I used to work for him and with him. He taught me how to straighten nails. He would reuse nails for old construction projects, taught me how to sweep. Uh-huh. And then my grandfather Gibbons, who I never knew, he died from injuries in an auto pedestrian accident when he was 59 years old. And this is 17 years before I was born. But he was an attorney, a judge. He had been a math professor at BYU. He was a coach, football, basketball, baseball coach. I've just been about finished with writing a biography. I've discovered so many sources, and I've discovered that for much of his professional career while he was serving as a judge, he wrote essays and poems under a pen name, mm-hmm. which were published in newspapers in Arizona, mm-hmm. and that gives great insight into his soul. But I love both of my grandfathers, and it's been sweet this past week, Father's Day, to contemplate their lives.
I never knew either of my grandfathers. I've never heard their voices. One grandfather, Wilford Samuelson, I carry his name as a middle name, and from everything I've heard about him, I just absolutely love him. But it's his father, my great-grandfather, that he's my second biggest hero, other than my dad. How have you felt the influence of your deceased grandfather, the one that you've never met in the flesh, at least to your knowledge? How have you felt his influence in your life? Have you felt guided or kind of looked over by him?
I have certainly felt his presence. He's been one of my great heroes of my life because his widow lived with us in Salt Lake City from the time I was 4 years old until I was 18. Mm-hmm. And then she passed away at our home in her 90s. But she was a unique, outspoken, salty character. And not everyone jived with Nana. We called her Nana, but I surely did. And soaked up stories of life in Arizona that became kind of the hero to me. Mm-hmm.
Through her telling
stories. And so I followed him in the law, and my father, who was also an attorney, if you can believe it, 3 generations of lawyers. Fortunately, none of my kids have chosen the law.
None of mine.
It's a tough tough
It is.
profession. And I have felt from time to time the presence of my grandfather. For example, about 14 years ago, I resigned my judgeship to answer a volunteer call to serve in a religious setting in Russia for 3 years. And on my last day on the bench, I went to my courtroom early in the morning before any of the bailiffs or clerks or attorneys were there. And I sat in my courtroom in the dark, getting ready for that final day on the bench. And I felt the presence of my grandfather so powerfully that I said out loud in the darkened room, "Grandpa, are you there?" Mm-hmm. And from time to time, I have also felt his nearness. And my faith is that there is a life after death, and that those departed loved ones of ours are closer than we know. Mm-hmm. And I certainly feel that with my grandfathers.
And I think if you had eyes to see, you could see the very close involvement. I really feel that. I think, careful not to take away our ability to choose and make decisions, but yeah, I think that our ancestors are much closer than we have any idea. It'll be fun to kind of see that, how it's how it's changed. One thing that I know that this is something that you feel powerfully about, as do I, and that is, how do you share your faith, Dan, with your grandkids? And maybe it's a little bit different, maybe not, but then having shared your faith with your kids as you raise them, what kind of thoughts or ideas, have you had any interesting experiences with that as you've tried to teach them? Oh, tell us what the age range of your grandkids are.
We have 15 grandchildren, 14 living. We had a grandson pass away on the day of his birth. Mm-hmm. But they are from almost newborn to close to 18 years of age. Wow. 15 grandchildren total.
Yeah.
And I over the years as I get older, my interests in life shrink, and the influence that I have with my grandchildren looms as an ever bigger priority in my life. In fact, that word influence I've thought a lot about. And I feel like that is one of my chief remaining roles in life. I hope I live another 20 or 30 years.
Influence in what way?
An influence for good in whatever way. And I really am not a fan of overt religious preaching to my children and grandchildren. I've seen in lives of other people how that can backfire. Someone may feel very strongly about their faith, but if their preachment becomes overbearing, it can actually have a rebound effect, a negative effect.
Yeah.
I think the influence that I hope to am trying to exert over my grandchildren is one of love, of support, and living moral principles, and also togetherness. Mm-hmm. A couple of the ways that my wife and I have tried to, and me in particular, tried to exert influence over my grandchildren is one through my diary. I am a dedicated diarist. I look at my diary as a personal tool for my own development, but also as a record for my children. I see that in my father's diaries. My dad would write. He would write often his children and grandchildren. The stories that he writes are just pure gold. Everything else that he wrote is kind of interesting about his other pursuits. Mm-hmm. But when he would tell a story about this grandchild said this, or mm-hmm. or my son or daughter said, did this, that it is absolute jewel in the midst of this pile of gravel, the diary. Yeah. So what I do is I will often write almost every day a little section in my diary called Glimpses of Our Posterity. And in it, I'll write interaction I've had with our children, their spouses, our grandchildren, and what they say and do. And then often, I learned this from my dad's diaries. My dad would often write something about one of his posterity, a personal note to us, and say, "I love you," or you're going to have a great life, or whatever. I do that in my diary too. I'll just say to my grandson James, you got this. You're going to succeed in this way. Another way of influence, I think, is gatherings. And for example, in a few weeks, Julie and I, the next several years in a row, or are going out of town with all of our posterity in a big rental house, and we spend a week, swimming and hiking and playing games, watching movies, and that kind of thing.
Where are you going this year?
We're going to Cedar City.
What would you consider to be the vital components of, creating a structure where you can influence them, through your strong belief in God and Jesus?
I have a library similar to your beautiful room here.
It's spacious, isn't it?
Well, it's probably about the same size as this room. But conversation, deep conversation in my library, usually with one or more of my posterity, has become a tradition. I learned that from my dad. My dad had a library at home, and he and I would spend time there. We would play chess. We would talk and have wide-ranging, deep conversations. And so I have carried that on with my kids. In fact, my kids will often mention, "Dad, I miss our talks in your library." And they'll often come home if they have something on their minds that they want to talk about. We'll go up to the library, close the door, where we're surrounded on four walls of books, and talk. My dad learned that from his dad, who had a big library in his home. There's something about the presence of the quiet environment of books and deep conversation, not superficial and not how are you doing, but where we're talking about things we're reading and things that are on our mind and about the past and about the future. That to me has been a big way where I got connection with my father and vicariously through him to my grandfather, and how I gain a deep connection with my children and now my grandchildren. In fact, when our children come to visit then they bring the grandchildren, even the little ones. I'm always up early in the morning reading in my library, and I'll hear little feet on the stairs because my library's upstairs like yours. And here will be my little 3-year-old grandson or 5-year-old granddaughter who will climb up into my arms and sit on the chair with me while I'm reading, but then I'll put the book down and then we'll talk. So deep conversation has been a way in my family through several generations of my heritage where we've gained connection and where influence has flowed vertically to the generations.
What would you say, Dan, to a grandfather that says, "I wish I was better at this," or "I wish I could have done something different," or "How do I start maybe even being a better grandfather than I was as a father?" I think that there's tons of grandfathers that really want to get better, and they recognize that there are opportunities to be better. What would you say to them?
I would say playfulness is really important. I only remember a single time, and I think my dad was a near perfect grandfather, but he never he never got down on the floor. I remember one time when he got down on the floor with our oldest grandson and played with him. This is when he was in his 90s. And I thought, wow, Dad. I'd never seen him do that with any of the older grandchildren who were much older than my children. My grandfather, Bay, was the carpenter. He never played. I worked with him, but never played with him. I got to tell you a story about Grandpa Bay that will illustrate his character. He was such a hard worker, and even into his 70s was working 12 and 14 hours a day, and usually projects for his 8 children. And we had a cabin, the big front porch that was slipping off. So my grandpa Bay said, "Well, let me come up and fix that for you. We're going to put new foundation posts in." And Danny, that's what he used to call me, Danny can help me. He can be my helper.
Were you excited or not so excited?
No. And so I was about 14 years of age.
At the height of your surly teen years.
So we went up, and on one day we dug the footings with about 2 feet of head space, and we poured the concrete, and then we let it dry for a couple of days, and then we went back and Grandpa had some jacks, hydraulic jacks. We jacked it up, and then we put new beams in, and then in the moment of truth, when everything was jacked up and Grandpa had these huge 4x4 beams all in place, ready to secure in. He is sweating and it is hot. It's the middle of the summer. There's spiders. And he said, he said, toenail it. And I didn't know what he meant. And he got frustrated with me. He said, toenail it. And I'm looking at my toe, and I said, what? He goes, toenail it, damn it, toenail it. It was the only time Grandpa ever swore at me. I now know toenail means you put a nail in at a 45-degree angle.
I had no idea.
I didn't either.
Yeah.
I now know what toenail is.
Now I know at the tender age of 60.
And anyway, so that kind of goes. So he was not one to play, but I definitely worked with him.
Was he conversing with you while you guys were working, or was he a pretty serious?
He was a pretty serious guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't converse a lot.
Yeah.
He did like to share ice. He did make root beer floats for us, and he raised tomatoes in his backyard, and he taught me how to love eating a tomato plant. So
yeah, the better thing.
Yeah. I got to mention this too. So the library in my home that I've talked about as being for deep conversation in my family is a room that I built myself after a basement library had flooded and I lost thousands of books. And Julie said, take one of the upstairs bedrooms and build this library. I built it all. I designed it. I built it with, and after it was finished, my father came to visit it and said, I believe your two grandfathers, both, are very pleased with this room that you've created. Grandfather Gibbons, because of his love for books, because I had all my books on the shelves, and your Grandpa Bay, because of the careful craftsmanship you've put into this room.
Oh, yeah.
And so that library to me is an extension of the love and influence of these two very different grandfathers. My carpenter, hardworking sense, Grandpa Bay, and my book-loving, intellectual Grandpa Gibbons. And so anyway, that makes that room especially tender and special in my heart.
Well, I'll bet you there's a wonderful spirit in there, and you wouldn't want to do anything in that room to detract from that.
That's for sure.
I can't fix or do anything to save my soul, but I've got, as you can tell on these bookshelves, I've got trinkets. My wife calls them trinkets, but each of them have great meaning to me, and I'm at the drop of a hat, I'm happy to tell people about it, but a lot of them are family oriented.
Yeah.
And so when I sit down and I do my legal work, for instance, this picture right here, which is my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother, and they're on the steps of their home that they left in Denmark back in 1919. And, I just feel this nearness. And to me, this thought kind of hit me, Dan. I'm wondering if you believe it, but I mean, or if you have what you think, but I wonder if we try to cling close to our ancestors, that makes it even easier for them to cling close, not only to us, but to our grandkids. And we live in a crazy world. Witness the events of the last week or two, especially, but I just think that, that his grandpas are sort of like, we should be this oasis, peace and wisdom and optimism. And I think that's something that's maybe overlooked or underestimated. And so how do you feel, how do you tell your grandchildren and your kids about your grandfather, dad? Do you make conscious efforts to talk to them about what they did and what they were like and show artifacts? Tell me what you do.
Like you, I love family and historical artifacts. And I have two in particular. I don't have many things from my but I have an object from each of my Grandpa Bay, who was the carpenter during World War II. He got a job in the Remington's arms factory in Salt Lake City as a carpenter. And one of his tasks was to make ammunition boxes where high caliber ammunition rounds were shipped to the front. And the boxes are about 2 feet long and a foot wide and 18 inches deep, and they're a sturdy construction. When Grandpa passed away, He had about 20 of these boxes down in his basement where he kept everything. And those were the preferred item for all of his sons and grandsons.
Really?
They were high premium, and my mom got one. She gave it to me. And,
why do you suppose?
Why
were they of such
great work? They're so usable because Grandpa used to use them as toolboxes. When he went to the job site, he would put his hammers and screwdrivers and all of his carpentry tools in these boxes.
Right.
And they're great for storing things. So I have one in our family room. We use it to store logs for our fireplace. Mm-hmm. And so that's been precious. And so I often talk to my grandchildren about that. I also have a high chair that he built for my mother in 1922 after she was born, and that all of his kids used, all of my aunts and uncles, my mom, several of her siblings and their kids used it. And then I used it, and my two older sisters and older brother, we all used it. That's in our kitchen. As far as an artifact I have his copy of the complete works of Shakespeare, that he absolutely loved Shakespeare, especially Hamlet, the play. In fact, the night he died, he had been in this auto pedestrian accident and was convalescing. He was reading Hamlet the night that he died. I have the book. I have his book, and Hamlet is my favorite play. Really? As well.
Why do you think it was his favorite?
I don't know, but I think he just maybe had good literary taste.
Yeah.
But he loved Hamlet, and this would be a good time to share this experience with my grandfather. My grandfather was an intellectual, but late in his life, in his he became a more spiritual man. He had sort of left the teachings in some respect of his youth, his religious teachings, but he came back late in his life. Of course, by that time, most of his family had sort of abandoned the faith of their youth. And my grandfather passed away on this night after he was reading hymn. And a couple of weeks later, on a Sunday morning, my dad, who was then the youngest in the family, and he was about 18 or 19 years old, he worked in a grocery store more than full time, including 16 hours on Saturday, so he rarely went to church. And on a Sunday morning, my grandmother came to my dad's bedroom and said, "Frank, get up and get out of bed. Your father just appeared to me, and he said, go get the boy up and get him to church."
I love go get the boy.
Go get the boy up.
Yeah.
They called him the boy. And in pondering this, in fact, in writing this biography that I'm writing a lengthy biography of this grandfather, it occurs to me that maybe Grandpa had sort of a literary jest in mind. He thought, I'm going to appear and leave a message for my son, like the ghost of Hamlet's father, who appeared and gave a ghostly message. And the interesting thing is that event, whether it was a real appearance by a departed spirit or a dream of my grandmother's, regardless of the true origin of it, it was a bombshell in our family.
Tipping point.
It was the tipping point. It was a revolutionary impetus in the family. From that point on, my dad did go to church, and all of his siblings then sort of reclaimed their faith, and their spouses who they had married outside the faith, they all embraced the faith once more, and so it really worked a revolution in our family.
I mean, what you're seeing is this incredible influence of your grandfather, and it would be nice to think, I believe this, that we do have those sort of powers of influence, but we need to be listening really, really careful to inspiration, to the Spirit, to guide us to what we ought to do. And I would think that maybe the approach we might have with each of our grandkids might be slightly different, if not radically different, just because they are who they are, and, that it's not just one size fits all sort of a thing. And these are wonderful stories. Do you enjoy being a grandpa? What's the thing you most enjoy?
Children's children are the crown of old men. Children's children are the crown of old men. My grandchildren are the light of my life. Being a grandfather is awesome. You have all the joys of parenthood without any of the trials. You are the fun one, and you can take them places and spoil them and treat them. And then when they are out of sorts or or need a change or whatever, you can hand them
Just
off
hand
to
them
dad
off.
or mom.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
And it's just an absolute delight to be a grandfather. It both brings your mortality into sharp focus because you realize you have a limited number of years to be with these precious children, but it also expands your immortal faith, your faith in an immortality, because you can see that the influence you have right now on your grandchildren is going to extend perhaps into the next century and beyond. Back to this idea of diary keeping. I believe that personal records, things we write, will have an ever increasing power, almost like a boulder being tossed into a calm pond with ripples going out. My dad, who's been a very careful was a careful diarist his whole life, and also a writer. He and my mom were living at the time in Brazil. For several years, they lived in Brazil. And they were traveling a great deal, and they spent a lot of time at airports. And my dad had this idea. He thought Old Testament and the New Testament, and we have the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He thought, I am going to write my own testament. And so what he did is, over a period of months, he took legal-size yellow pads, and as they sat in airports in Sao Paulo or Belo Horizonte or wherever, he would write an essay about a spiritual experience or a miraculous experience of his life that built his faith, a faith-building experience. And ultimately, he had about 50 of them, and they were numbered. And he typed them up and privately published them in a hardbound book that he called My Spiritual Testament. And he gave a copy to each of his children and his grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren. Wow, getting copies. And of all the things my dad's written, and he's written many, many books, though that is the book that I believe is going to have the most lasting impact. And so that is something I intend to do. And in fact, I've started it, is to write my own. It's not really an autobiography. It's more like a spiritual part of your
memoir.
A spiritual memoir. And these are the landmark effects in my life, and the watershed events of my life spiritually. And it is really inspiring to go back in your life and think about what events have really shaped my life spiritually, and then reduce that to writing for the benefit of your posterity.
Well, you were talking about that. I'm at the ripe old age of 69, soon to turn 70. I notice that as I get older, body gets a little more creaky and, things pop up. One advantage that I've found is that I start seeing connections. I start seeing the hand of God in my life, that's why that happened, or this, and you start kind of spiritually connecting the dots. And I think that's a wonderful lesson to teach your kids, and your grandkids, who maybe you don't know right now why you're going through this particularly difficult thing, but let me tell you, my experience has been that there were reasons for it. And then to give them examples. Let's talk about the power of stories. So I've been vastly entertained by your stories, and some of these I'll never forget. And I just think there's this power in stories. What do you think? It's a leading question, but how do you see the role of stories for grandfathers?
Yeah, there is a call, a human call for stories. Humans are storytellers. Well, you can see this in almost any circumstance we go into in our lives, whether it be in a church, hearing a sermon, or in a business presentation. And actually, I was, as a trial judge and formerly a trial attorney, this is true in the courtroom, it's true almost anywhere. When someone stands up and reads from a text or gives a very dry recitation of just facts, everybody tunes out. Click. It's off. But if they tell a personal story, even with halting language, even imperfect grammar, the stories bind our hearts. Recitation of dry facts bind our minds. And that there's a place for that. Sure. But when we tell a story, we gain access to the hearts of the people. And I am very interested, and I know you are too, in this idea of there being a binding of hearts between generations and even through multiple generations. That's one of the powerful attributes of a written story, is that it can transcend time and space, and it can have influence upon our posterity far beyond our life, maybe even multiple generations beyond our life. I will say this too regarding my grandparents, my grandfathers. My grandfather did not write a personal history. I have a handful of letters that he wrote, and then I have found about 50 poems and essays that he published anonymously.
Did they give a glimpse into?
They give a glimpse into his soul more than anything,
Really?
any of the dry facts of his life. I didn't think my grandpa Bay had any sort of literary ambitions, but a few years ago, my sister, my oldest sister, she brought to me a little collection of notebooks that were my grandpa Bay's. And my grandpa Bay did keep a diary. Most of them are, I worked 16 hours today and I'm going to bill so and so this much. But then one of his books is this little book of sermons that he gave while he was a local ecclesiastical leader.
Right.
And they're magnificent.
All right.
And they show that he had a deep spiritual connection. But the stories that from my grandfather's life, and there are numerous stories that I have record of from my father, from my grandmother, and from my aunts and uncles, are absolute gold to me, and just show this real human side of my grandfather. So, I'm a big storyteller, and I just I know that I know having heard excerpts of your autobiography. That there is pure gold in your autobiography and stories that are going to resonate, especially if they're tinged with some humor.
Yeah,
and
they show me to be a fool.
Exactly. So we are all human beings with our own foibles and weaknesses and sins and mistakes and stumbling, and that is the beautiful part of life. Is that I think that people resonate with stories from and about imperfect people, and if it's only a story about the guy who did everything right, was the straight A student, the Boy Scout, the top of his class, pilot, and then went on to run for Congress or something like that, that's kind of interesting. But for me, and this is what I tried to put into this biography I'm writing on my grandfather, for me it's more interesting to have somebody who struggles, and maybe struggles with their faith even, and comes to some kind of new resolution on all of the problems and perplexities of life. So that's the power of stories, and I loved the stories my grandmother taught particularly.
Now, if there were 3 words that would describe you as a grandfather, what would those 3 words be?
Loving, funny, and introspective.
Those are great words.
I'm a real introvert, and so my grandkids know that during family gatherings, I will sometimes get too much. I'll go up to my library. I'll say I'll be back in a few minutes. I'll go up to my library, and usually the ones who are also introverted and or introspective.
Interesting.
And so then they'll join me up there, and we'll have our own little private party until we have regained our social confidence enough to rejoin the big group.
Very interesting. I'll share my kryptonite, my grandfather kryptonite, with you if you'll share your kryptonite.
Sure.
And then I want to ask you what you think your strengths, 3 strengths or whatever your strengths are as a grandfather. My kryptonite are whiny 4-year-old grandchildren. And I sort of wither. And I try not to I have a temper, and I try to really chomp on my tongue and go up to my office and take a vacay from things. But what's your kryptonite?
Well, mine is exactly the same. In fact, we had a family gathering a couple of weeks ago, and there was that. I was holding our youngest, who's just an infant, a little girl, and some of the 4 to 7-year-old set were behind me, banging things and so a couple of times I turned around and I spoke sharply, and one of my daughters took exception to that about my correcting her children. So anyway, so then It all worked out.
Yeah.
It all worked out. Well, mine is exactly the same.
Okay, now what do you think what are a couple of strengths that you know that you're good at that you rely on? What are those?
I think I have an ability to observe and connect with the quietest of my grandchildren that are here because we have a very, very diverse group of really creative kids and a lot of musical kids. And we have three pianos in our house, for example. We used to have five pianos when my kids were growing up.
Right.
And the children play, a couple of the in-laws play, and lots of the grandkids play. And there is also a lot of humor, a lot of loud conversation. So in the midst of all of this cacophony and happy jubilation, I notice I have a few grandchildren who are sort of like me, who are more quiet and introspective. And I notice them, and I don't want any of them to be sort of lost in the shuffle. I want their voices to be heard as well. I guess what I'm really saying is because they have, in fact, they have more a deeper story maybe than the extroverted loud ones. And so I think I have a gift for seeing the qualities of each of the grandkids and recognizing the diverse personalities and appreciating and loving every single one and making sure that no one is lost in the shuffle.
What a wonderful gift. Any other gift that you think that you have?
I learned from my dad. He used to call it being the last of the big spenders, to be generous, to be financially and time-wise generous with the kids. I remember my dad, for example, when we would go out to dinner, he would say, "Order anything you want." And
of course, it was McDonald's or
whatever.
No,
we took some of our grandkids to Hires a couple weeks ago, and I was thinking of my dad. I said to the grandkids, "Order anything you want.
Yeah.
You want a combo and a milkshake? Sure,
Yeah.
go for it." And they did. And so then afterwards, the waitress gave me the tab.
Yeah.
And I think it was $140 or something for the group.
Yeah.
And I said to my two older grandsons who were there, who 9 and 12 years old, I said, "Well, how much, we ought to leave a tip for this waitress. She looks like she probably has a family and she's working hard. She needs a good tip. What do you think?" And the older grandson, Ivan, he said, "How about $8.50? I said, "Yeah, that'd be pretty good. But it's customary to give at least 15% tip." And so what's the math on that? So these two older boy math whizzes, they figured it out. And then they came up with me with their little sister to pay. When we got off the camera, I said, "I've been thinking, why don't we make it $50 even for the tip?" Their eyes got big. I don't know what there is about being outrageously generous, just generally in your life, but also teaching your kids to be outrageously generous, because we have so many advantages being born in this society. And I mean, even the poorest among us are living like absolute kings compared to most people out, in different parts of the world. Anyway, so I love that. I love passing on that kind of mindset to my grandkids.
My dad was a great tipper, especially if he went out for breakfast. The waitresses would be waiting on him probably. I mean, he didn't make a great show of it, but he did talk a little bit about it. He gave the reasons why and it was because he empathized with them, and he had been very poor. And anyway, that was something that I know has been passed on from me to my kids, and I just think that's a fantastic example. Okay, so now we're coming down the home stretch. I want you to think a minute if you need to, but what advice would you give to a grandpa, someone like me, someone like anybody, any grandpa on Grandpa Street, that says, I need to up-level my game. I need to be a better grandpa. And I've done some good things, and maybe I've done some things not so good. I've hid, from being a grandpa. Or maybe I don't think I'm a good storyteller, or what do I have to offer? What would you suggest? I mean, you've done these things over decades that are just incredible. What kind of passing advice would you have for the grandpas out there in the channel?
I think the first one, to leave some written legacy. Now, not everybody is a gifted writer, but honestly, a recorded story in your own voice is maybe better than something you would write down. So if you can write something down, that's great. But I think it's, well, especially in this age of technology, and everybody has a smartphone.
Yeah.
Where they can record themselves. I would suggest that what you do is you get in the habit of making recordings of stories from your life and frame them as stories. Don't try and put order in your life. Actually, I'm gonna put a plug in for Rivers, who I think had a brilliant method. See, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I recall, when you decided to write an autobiography, what you did is you got a stack of 3x5 cards, and over a period of weeks or months, you would just jot down in free time watching TV or before bed or whatever. You would just jot down in a few words something to remind you of a story, and just a short form for the story. And until you had a big stack of cards, then you laid them out on the table, put them in some kind of a chronological order, and then you wrote your autobiography. But the key is that you just do something. So that'd be the first thing I would recommend. The other thing, our fathers all have some sort of a trade or profession. Mm-hmm. And that's great, whether it's as a doctor, as a bricklayer, physical therapist, whatever it is, accountant. That's been sort of the central part of your life, that you decide from this point on, my primary profession is grandpa. That is my primary profession.
That's a brilliant idea.
And I do have a day job, or I do other things, but everything else, everything you do from this point in your life is going to support your key central role as a grandfather, a great grandfather.
And would you just say, get started?
Just get started as simply as you can.
Yeah. This is fabulous, and I'm going to reserve the right. I've already talked to Dan about this, but I'd love to have Dan come back on, and we'll talk about some other things. But thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Take care, everybody. That's it for today's episode of the Grandpa Channel. Until next time, keep the mic hot, the memories fresh, and the jokes just slightly inappropriate. I'm out of here. It's pretty good, I think.